everybody who's seeing us now, hopefully, welcome to eVirtual. My name is Peter Wooding. I'm the Chief Executive of Automotive EV, and thank you for joining us. eVirtual is our online conference platform covering all the essential topics as we move towards the future of sustainable mobility. Each weekly session will focus on a specialised subject delivered by expert speakers from within that field. In our first session of the series, we will be looking at the reverse logistics of high voltage battery packs. And I'm delighted to welcome two great speakers, Panayi from Motion and Achim from Kuehne Nagel.
So just to introduce who Motion are, we are a economic consultancy looking specifically at the electric vehicle and battery supply chain. We produce a number of monthly reports and quarterly outlooks. The two featured here are battery chemistry monthly assessments and our EV and battery quarterly outlook. We also produce some reports on European and North American EV charging outlooks as well as doing bespoke consultancy. Our company is founded on a bottom-up analysis of the entire EV market. So for every electric vehicle that's being released, passenger car, light duty vehicle, buses, coaches, heavy duty and medium duty trucks. We collect a range of metrics around those vehicles, around battery pack size, battery chemistry, range, vehicle price, charging interface, and so on. From that, we build out our longer term analysis as well. Just to give an overview of where we are with the market to date, for 2019, the market actually relatively underperformed on a global level. There was a number of factors driving this, and one of the things I'm going to draw out in this presentation is the role of government intervention in this market and how important it still is and how important it will remain for a number of years to come, in our opinion. So in 2019, people were forecasting very, very high growth at the beginning of the year. The reality is the market really didn't grow very much at all by the end of the year. And that, if you look at the chart on the right here, you'll see that that was really based on the fact that China saw very limited growth, and I'll go into the reasons for that shortly. The US actually contracted, or US and Canada actually contracted, while the European Union saw significant growth in the market. And really that comes down to government intervention, but I'm going to talk about that shortly. Looking forward to 2020, well, we had an anticipated growth of roughly 20% for this year. Now, clearly, we've had to make the revisions for our forthcoming quarterly outlook, which is actually out later this week. And in a briefing we gave to our subscribers on the coronavirus 2 weeks ago, we started to make some revisions about what we think will happen in the market this year. Now, if you look at the total automotive market, it should be down roughly 20 to 25% year on year. The EV market is shielded from some of that loss based on the fact that it is continuing to grow, and penetration rates within the total automotive market are rising. So the total growth will be down, but not as much as with the total vehicle market. That said, the news is very good in the longer term, and I'll come to that shortly. Now, just to come back to this point about why government intervention is very important in this market, the chart in front of you shows Chinese vehicle sales in 2019, 2018, and 2017 by month. And what you can see is in 2019, there's a very significant uptick in the first half of the year, and then the market collapsed, and month or year to year sales in every month post June were down in 2019. Now, the reason for that is that the Chinese government revised the subsidy program, cut it in half effectively in the middle of the year 2019, and you saw a big pre-buy effect before that, and then the market really contracted. And now that was indicative of the fact that there had been some overestimates of how mature the market had become and how self-sustaining it had become. And now, as a result, the subsidy regime has been maintained for 2020, and it's actually going to be sustained further because of the coronavirus as well. Chinese have got a real interest in this market working for them. It's a strategic market for them, and one where they're leading the world, really. If you think back to my first slide, they're over half the vehicle sales for electric vehicles in the market in the world at the moment. Now, for the US to explain why there was that market weakness last year, what this chart shows you is the tax credits available for the two best-selling OEMs in this space, which is Tesla and GM. And what you can see is that before January 2019, there was a $7,500 US dollar tax credit for buying electric vehicles, and that was removed in the beginning of 2019. What you saw is a significant pre-buy effect and then a drop-off in the market. That tax credit has been removed totally now for 2020, and again you saw a pre-buy effect at the end of 2019 as people were still trying to get that last remaining tax credit. Now the point of that is that again the market is not fully self-sustaining, requires government intervention, and it reacts strongly to any change in government intervention as well. Now the European Union on the other hand, or European Union plus EFTA as we define it, is a different picture altogether. So what this chart shows you is, we'll remove quite a bit of the detail here, but what it shows you is the new 95 gram per kilometre CO2 target that's been phased in from 2020 versus OEM's fleet average CO2 emissions for 2017 to 2019. So we've just started to get some of the 2019 data through. So this is not a full sample of all the OEMs in the market. But what you can see is that even at this late stage in 2019, OEMs were nowhere near getting towards that CO2 target for 2020. And in fact, the CO2 emissions from OEMs have been going up on a fleet average basis. That's due to a couple of things. First is lower percentage of diesel vehicles being sold in the fleet. Diesel performs relatively well on CO2 versus gasoline engines. And the other thing is that vehicles have been getting larger as well. So we've moved gradually further and further away from the target that's coming in. Now, the issue with this is that there's a 95 euros per gram, 95 euros per gram fine for every gram that you're over the 95 grams per kilometre limit, and that's multiplied by your vehicle sales. So if you do the maths on that, you're talking about fines in the order of tens of billions for certain OEMs if they continue to perform in this way. That's a big push factor for them to adopt EV technology, and that technology is primarily focused on plug-in hybrids in the short term, and then moving in the longer term towards battery electric vehicles, fully electric vehicles. Now, with the advent of the coronavirus crisis, it seems unlikely now that those fines are going to be enforced, and there may be some slipping in this, but the general direction is clear. And what you see from OEMs in terms of their investments and their own targets is that they're pushing very heavily into this market. And in 2020 to date, the sales data we have goes up to March now. You don't really see the impact of the coronavirus in there. EV sales in the first quarter in Europe are very strong. Obviously, they're going to drop off in Q2 as the lockdown effects get felt. Now, putting this all together, just to move this along a little bit. So the point I'm trying to make is that the market is very immature at the moment and it's growing quickly, but it needs that support. So what these charts show you is on the left-hand side chart is the cumulative battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicle sales from 2015 to 2019, and then our forecast from 2020 to 24. So a 5-year period to compare with. You see that the growth in this market is exponential over the coming years, and that's even factoring in some of the revisions we've made for 2020 and into 2021 due to the coronavirus. And then the chart on the right is the cumulative battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric battery deployment resulting from those vehicle sales. Again, that's based on our analysis of every vehicle in the market. We're tracking all the vehicles coming into the market in terms of the model lineups and so on. So we have a very good idea about what the average pack sizes will be and also what the chemistries will be. And I'll talk to that in a moment. But this operates at a lag, clearly, when you're talking about battery recycling, which is the topic for today. And so what we've done is we've estimated, and you can only really estimate these numbers, but we've estimated the number of electric vehicles that have come off the road in the last couple of years, and then where we think that's going to be in 2020 to 2024, and then beyond that out to 2030. Now, there's a significant lag between the vehicle being sold and the vehicle coming off the market. I mean, that could be 10 to 12 years. In some cases, it's less. The way we've worked this out is we've looked at battery degradation cycles for the vehicles that we have data for that on, and we know to some extent what the average life of these vehicles is before they've actually even come off the market, because you see from service data and so on. So these are estimates, but they're based in a fairly rigorous analysis how we think the market's going to develop. So again, the thing to bear in mind is that this market really starts to take off in the middle of this decade and grows exponentially from then from the recycling point of view. Now, just to say, this is our longer term forecast up to 2040, which is what we release every quarter. And I just wanted to reiterate this fact that even in 2030, the market is still only really growing. So the point is that you have a significant opportunity in terms of volumes developing in this market in the next 5 years, but then really takes off thereafter. And the issue is as well, as I move forward into the next slide, is that the technology within the market is changing quite a bit, and also pack sizes as well. So what these charts show you is on the left-hand side, the types of vehicles being sold, the battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles by vehicle class, so or vehicle segment, probably more accurate way to say this for passenger car and light duty vehicles. And then on the right-hand side, it shows you the internal combustion engine vehicle sales over the same period. A couple of things to notice here. The chart on the left, the electric vehicles, the market is much more fluid at the moment because OEMs are still developing strategies in this market. Vehicles being released and then taken off very quickly just to test the water. The chart on the right, the picture is much more steady. There are mega trends going on, but it's much more steady picture. We expect, with certain caveats, the electric vehicle market to look more and more like the internal combustion engine vehicle market over time in terms of the segmentation. There are caveats to that, and certain things you won't electrify or you won't electrify fully, but that has profound implications on pack size over time as well. So you have a couple of things happening in the market. You have likely that the compact part of the market and the compact part of the market will grow, particularly in China and maybe in India and places like that. That has an impact on battery chemistry. You're going to see a lot of LFP in that market. Also slightly smaller pack sizes, but also the SUV market will grow and the light duty vehicle market will grow. There's very few electric pickups at the moment, and that will change over time. So that has implications for pack size. I'm not going to give too much away in terms of what we think that would be, but pack sizes in general are growing over time, and that's something to consider. This chart shows you this discussion I wanted to raise around battery chemistry and how the market is changing. So this is taken from our monthly report that we do, and it just shows you within a year how much the aggregated battery chemistry is coming into the market changes over time. Now, if you're going to take this further back, so if you're going to look at the vehicles that are coming off the road now and in the next couple of years, the chemistries will be much more heavily dominated by LFP. And then if you look forward into the future, the chemistries will be much more heavily dominated by high nickel NCM chemistries. Now, that means that you're dealing with different types of batteries, profoundly different types of batteries in terms of the chemistry, which has processing issues, but also has economic issues to think about as well. Nickel, cobalt, they're very high value metals. Be important to take out those batteries for purely economic reasons, but also longer term as well for environmental reasons, because you don't want heavy metals leaching into groundwater and so on, especially for a green product. The chart on the right is just something that we always show, which is just a reminder that there's a lag in these things as well. The vehicles released in a given year, so what we call year T, aren't necessarily the ones that are sold or take the majority of the market share in that year. That dark purple patch shows our estimation of the models sold in a given year by the year of release. And you see that actually the majority of vehicles sold in 2020 will actually be from 2019. So it just gives you an idea of the way that this battery chemistry develops over time. So hopefully that's a few things to think about as we move forward with the discussion. The key things I just want to reiterate then are that the market is very young and is very reliant on government support, and it has a big impact in terms of what happens in vehicle sales in a given year. That battery pack sizes are developing quickly and are changing as well because of the range of vehicles coming into the market and their use cases. And also the battery chemistries are developing relatively quickly as well because battery technology is improving, scale builds up as well, and also because the range of applications are becoming more diverse as well. So I'll leave it there, and then we'll take any questions at the end.
Thank you, Adam. Great presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we will cover questions after both of you've spoken. If everything's okay with you, Achim, I will leave you to take the lead. Thank you.
Yes, excellent. If you can go on slide 1, please, because I see Adam on the previous slide. However, now I see it. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. I am Achim from Kuehne and Nagel. We are an international logistics service provider, and we have approximately 150 people that are dedicated and specialized to transport and to stores. And the session which we are hosting here today is looking at damaged and defective batteries from a freight forwarder's perspective. Let's start with a quick refresher. Lithium-ion batteries are dangerous goods, and due to their energy density, there's always a risk of a spontaneous combust. That means that actually property, facilities, assets, life is at risk if misused, if the batteries are being misused. And actually, to make things worse, once the lithium-ion battery is on fire, it is almost impossible to extinguish that fire. Now, a lot of consumer confidence was lost over the past years in the high-tech industry, with Apple iMacs being on fire or Samsung Galaxies catching fire. And now recently, we also see that the general public is getting more and more aware of the risk and the price of new mobility, because we see e-scooters catching fire, we saw exploding e-bikes, and yes, we also have seen electric vehicles, unfortunately, on fire. So what is the objective of my presentation today? The objective today is to create awareness around the dangers which come along when transporting damaged and defective lithium-ion batteries. And what I would like to do today is, besides others, I would like to give you some guidance as how you, as an OEM or Tier 1 supplier, how you can assess the risk and how you can mitigate your risks at the dealerships with regards to the reverse flows of battery packs. If you please go to the next slide, we will see a small showcase. Just imagine the following situation. There's a consumer, 8 o'clock in the morning, who is showing up at any one of your dealerships across Europe. And the dealer has not been engaged in an accident, not the dealer, but the consumer has not been engaged in an accident. He simply says, I would like to change my battery pack because charging takes too long, or maybe drive range is not as good anymore. So there's nothing wrong with the pack, but he would like to get it replaced against a newer one. So these battery packs, as also Adam mentioned a couple of minutes ago, they're getting bigger and bigger. They are very bulky. They range anywhere between 200, 300, up to 700 kilograms, 2.5 meters wide and 1.50 meters tall. So they are very, very bulky. And now imagine that during that handling operation at the dealership, the battery drops. Those 500 kilograms are dropping on the ground. So do we now have a safety concern? Yes or no? By the end of this presentation, you will be able to answer this question yourself. But prior to actually running you through this exercise, let's have a quick look into the different classification of battery types when it comes to transport regulations. So before actually touching a battery, we go to regulations, and we can see that the classification divides between new batteries, used batteries, damaged and defective batteries as one category. There are critical batteries and prototype batteries. So the topic of this discussion today is damaged and defective batteries. So those batteries do no longer comply with the so-called UN 38.3 test. That means you can transport these batteries, but the transportation of these batteries is subject to particular requirements. Well, let's have a look into that. If you go to the next slide. Who actually identifies whether the battery is damaged and defective or whether the battery is just used? Well, in assessing a battery, the type of the battery, the previous use and the previous misuse must always be taken into consideration. Think about this like buying a helmet for a bicycle. And once you had a bicycle accident, you fell down, the helmet may still look okay, but the truth is the helmet does no longer have the same quality standards because the first impact has been absorbed. But will the helmet still have the same quality when you have a second or third impact? Most likely not. That is also something that we need to consider with lithium-ion batteries. What happened to the car before? What happened to the battery before? And actually, on the right-hand side of the slide, what you can see is a so-called an example of a battery status assessment. So every brand, every battery manufacturer will do this on their own by asking questions such as, is fluid leaking from the battery? Or do we see any melted wires? And no matter what these questions are, which of course have to be meaningful, the moment you answer one of these questions as yes, that means this battery is actually damaged and defective. If the battery is damaged and defective, what we can see on the last bullet point on the slides, and as mentioned before, they are liable to a dangerous reaction. So they can catch fire during transport. On the top left of the slide, we can see a flow chart where we have the large arrow which goes to the right, which says UN battery tested, no shipment under SP 310. That actually means here we have a battery that is no longer, or that misses the UN 38.3 tests, and you want to ship it. This actually is a prototype battery. A prototype battery is a battery where a manufacturer manufactures less than 100 pieces per year, and he wants to ship these prototype batteries to testing backwards and forwards. There are special provisions. You can ship these batteries, but there are special provisions to be considered. And likewise, do we have to consider special provisions when it comes to damaged and defective batteries, as we can see from this diagram over here. And in this particular case, we are zooming into critical battery no, which means the battery is damaged and defective, but not critical. And this particular battery, as we can see from the red box, needs to be transported according to SP 376 and P908. So what does this now mean? This webinar is to demystify what this actually means. And we're going to have a look at this at the next slide. On that slide, we can see on the left hand the multiple modes of transport and the associated dangerous goods regulations. So on the bottom of the slide, we see the special provisions. So under ADR, which is the dangerous goods regulation for overland transportation, there are special provisions from 188, 230, 284. So you see the numbers on the bottom of the slide. These special provisions are applicable for battery transportation and are highlighted the special provision 376, which is the applicable special provision for damaged and defective batteries. And together with the special provision, there's always a packing instruction, which corresponds to the battery life cycle. So the prototype battery has a different packaging instruction compared to the damaged and defective battery. And as we can see over here, special provision 376 goes in line with packing instruction 908 or packing instructions LP 904. And what does again mean? You can see on the bullet point in the middle of the slides, the following batteries are actually subject to being treated as damaged and defective. And the last point says there, cells and batteries that have sustained physical or mechanical damage. So that battery pack at the dealer at 8 o'clock in the morning, which dropped on the ground, that battery pack experienced physical damage. That means this battery is already liable to be considered damaged and defective. Now, when shipping these damaged and defective batteries, not only we have to apply the UN Class 9 identification label that we as freight forwarders know that this is hazardous cargo of that particular commodity, but also in capital letters, these battery packs must be labeled as damaged and defective lithium-ion batteries. Let's now have a look now into the special provision 376 and afterwards into the packing instructions. So on the next slide, we can see that if you want to transport a battery which is liable to an explosion during transportation, obviously this is asking for a special packaging provision. And the special packaging in this particular case, must be a steel box which is UN approved and certified. And on the top right of the slide, you can see how to demystify this UN classifications. So besides others, the classification code is identifying what type of material the particular transport box needs to be made of, or the approval country. Please be aware of the following, that you cannot just buy any steel box which has a UN approved number, but each and every lithium-ion battery must be approved for a particular box. So if you have different battery types, that does not mean that you can put the same high voltage battery into the same transport box. There may be differences between the energy density of those batteries, which again requires different sizes and different types of boxes. So actually, you need to marry the box together with your battery, and that process can take time. This process can take time anywhere between 3 weeks up to 6 months, depending on complexity. The long time frame will be required if this battery type has never been tested anywhere in the world before on that particular transport box. That means fire tests need to be performed, and that again takes a lot of time, and also this implies a lot of money. The packaging group 2 is applicable under LP 908, and the packaging group 2 means it has to meet the 6 very strict and rigid requirements which you can see on the slide. I just would like to emphasize the last one, the non-combustibility. That means the box must sustain fire. So this is of course a different transport box compared to shipping a new battery, where actually you would use a wooden box. And if a wooden box catches fire, it obviously will combust, while these boxes may not combust any fire. You can see on the picture on the bottom right of this slide, this is a safety transport box from Genius Technology. This box has a weight of approximately 600 kilograms and is approved to transport lithium-ion batteries, and it will sustain explosion and fire during transportation. And just as a quick reminder, the packaging group 2 is applicable for damaged and critical and defective batteries, while the packaging group 1 is applicable, and the packaging requirements are even stricter for packaging group 1 compared to packaging group 2. Let's go to the next slide, please, where actually we're going to have a look at what does this now mean for you and for your dealerships. The question is, are you ready to handle the reverse flow of high voltage battery packs? Our recommendation to you would be to perform a very simple risk assessment, which is illustrated by the graphic on the right of the slide. What you want to do is you want to perform a 3-step risk assessment exercise by starting to actually identifying the hazard at the dealership or at your logistics department. For example, have all your trainees which are authorizing the shipment of lithium batteries, or the technicians or the engineers at the dealership, have they gone through competence training, and have they been retrained again? Or when you are having dealerships all across Europe, have you considered that in different countries there are different legal requirements which are applicable to actually manage lithium-ion batteries? So the first task is to identify the hazard. The second step is then to assess the likelihood of the occurrence. So is there a high likelihood that this is actually going to happen, or is the risk that this has happened very, very improbable to almost no likelihood? So from a value from 1 to 5, you can categorize that, to then eventually take the third step, to evaluate the severity of the occurrence. So if something's going to happen, is this going to be a catastrophe? Is this going to be very dangerous? Is it a major impact, a minor impact, or is it even to be completely neglected, the implication? So you can perform this risk assessment, and I will come back to that in just a second. But how can you mitigate those risks? You can mitigate the risk by proper training of all your staff and all your employees that handle lithium-ion batteries. And you have to make sure that those colleagues actually have the right competency. Taking in mind that the lithium-ion technology in the automobile industry is still considered a very young technology, very often I see from my experience that these tasks are being outsourced to third parties to give approval to ship batteries. There may be now a point of time to think whether you want to insource this task. The handling procedures at the dealerships, do you have them in place? Because the first question in case of an incident that people are going to ask is, where is the handling instruction? And of course, there are handling instructions at dealerships, but have they also been updated on lithium models, on lithium battery packs? Question mark. Approval from dangerous goods safety advisors. So you should never ever allow your dealership to simply dispatch the battery. There should always be a 4I principle that one of your own dangerous goods safety advisors will actually approve that this shipment is now good to go. Engagement with your freight forwarder. Don't just call a freight forwarder, ask him to pick up a battery, and then you call another forwarder tomorrow. Make sure that these freight forwarders which you have selected have an agreed process in place together with you, so that safety measurements have been taken into consideration and have been approved beforehand. And eventually, I also would like to emphasize the internal awareness. It is super important that all the people at the dealership and along the supply chain have been made aware of the fact that there is a likelihood of lithium-ion batteries being damaged and defective at our dealership. What do we have to do? So let's now go to this example on the bottom of the slide before I will come to the end of this presentation. So here again, here's a dealer, here's a consumer which comes at the dealerships. The battery drops. So the first exercise we're going to do is, what is the probability that this incident is going to happen? Well, the truth is, I know it happened. We have seen incidents, we heard about incidents where batteries have dropped and modules have dropped. And we also heard from Adam previously, and it's also common knowledge, that the number of EVs on the road will be a hockey stick development. So there will be thousands and thousands and millions of electric vehicles hitting the roads over the next couple of years. Likewise, there will be cars coming back from the aftermarket. So the likelihood that this is going to happen again is absolutely there. So let's have a look at the severity level. What happens if the battery drops and if I do not take any precautious measures and I leave the battery at my dealership on a Friday afternoon and on a Friday night or Saturday morning, this battery actually catches fire, which is possible. Then we're going to have a catastrophe because this fire gets so hot, it will melt the roof of the dealership probably within a couple of minutes, and we truly have a catastrophe. Which means in this example, which I've given over here, the risk index would be a likelihood of 4, and the severity would be alpha, which means looking into the possibility, safety risks, tolerability, we will have a 3A, intolerable situation, which again asks for immediate actions which have to be undertaken in order to mitigate the risk. We are now going at the last slide, and I would like to summarize and give you guys some recommendations for aftermarket logistics people here on the call. What I've experienced over the past couple of years is actually that we talk to aftermarket, and aftermarket says, Kuehne Nagel, can you bring these new batteries to the dealerships? And yes, it's complicated, it's dangerous goods, there are special provisions which we need to take into consideration, but obviously it can be done. But then we are also asking the question, if I bring a battery to the dealer, what actually happens with the battery which needs to be replaced? It may be a used battery, but it may be a damaged and defective or even a critical battery. So our recommendation is to never separate the process. I know that we are talking to very big organizations and there are matrix organizations and different departments and divisions, but it makes absolute sense to look at this at the holistic process. How did the battery go to the dealer and how do I get that battery back? And in fact, the second bullet point on the slide over here, the reverse flow. We highly recommend not to incorporate the reverse flow of the batteries into the standard reverse flow of the spare parts. Sometimes dealers overorder or they order certain parts to identify once they have the car at the garage that they don't need all the parts, so they're sending the parts back to the spare parts center. We should strictly separate those two supply chains, and lithium-ion battery reverse logistics deserves a separate and special supply chain. I also would like to put some words of wisdom here again around the storage and the quarantine boxes. So this dealership, as we mentioned before, who dropped the battery, What they have to do is they have to put this battery into a quarantine box. And then this quarantine box needs to be observed for 24 hours to identify whether or not there will be a spontaneous chemical reaction. There's no law in this world which dictates that a dealer must have, by law, a safety box, a quarantine box. For transportation, we have all these different provisions and instructions which I shared with you previously. For storage, such a thing does not exist by the law, but we highly recommend that every dealership which deals with high voltage batteries does at least have one of these quarantine boxes available. And you want to make sure there are like a handful of providers out there in the market. You want to select a provider which is able to also handle these big batteries. There are more companies out there that can handle modules. There are only very few companies out there which be able to handle these big batteries, which if they are on fire, that will be a catastrophe. And last but not least, please also challenge your freight forwarder. Don't just call any freight forwarder to ship dangerous goods to handle and to maneuver with your damaged and defective lithium-ion batteries. Challenge your freight forwarder. Verify their approval process, for example. Make sure that they have trained people. Make sure that their dangerous goods safety advisor is an expert on lithium-ion batteries. And with that, I would like to hand back to Peter.
But thank you, Adam. Thank you, Achim. Thank you for the world for joining us and looking. I hope we've all gained from it. I certainly have. So we will end when I've finished with a video catch-up of the Kuehne Nagel app for you to take in and look for. But thank you very much again. Really appreciate your support and the support of all of our viewers in this case. And let's just keep safe, be positive, and build this particular industry to even greater levels. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.